So I will call the Finance Committee meeting to order at 9:06. I think for housekeeping, I'll just mention, since we have a lot to cover today and we're already running late, maybe if people could put their questions into the chat feature, and if need be, I will read it off to Terry and Corey if they don't have access with screens. So our first item of business is the meeting minutes. Do we have any comments or changes on the Thursday, February 25th meeting minutes? Okay, so seeing no.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Perfect. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, do so by saying aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed, say nay. Okay, the meeting minutes are approved. It looks like Corey has been able to join. Margaret's got a hand up.
Yes, I wanted to make sure that you saw he was on the screen.
All right,
I'm here. Can you hear me?
good. Yep, we can hear
Okay,
you just
great.
fine. All right, so why don't we go to, there's no old business. Let's go to new business. Item A, Susquehanna Accounting and Consulting Solutions, assessment of current operations, covered by Corey and Terry.
All right, great. Thanks for having me. Apologies that it took me so long to get in, but glad to be here this morning. Just wanted to cover sort of where we're at as far as the assessment goes. So at this point, we've gone through the preliminary assessment. It took us about a day or two to go through just the list that we had for the Director of Finance position job duties. We accomplished that by meeting with Margaret. We also met with the Controller's office and a bunch of staff in the Commissioner's office as well, just to go over the financial operations, that Tom either did or that were transferred in his absence, and just make sure there were no gaps there. So I don't know that we necessarily need to go through the detail. If there's any questions, we can walk through those, but we've basically gone through everything from an operational standpoint, I think, and everything's being covered, whether it be by different people or by us, as it pertains to the operational task. So at that point, then we moved into the next phase. Task 2 was really to start looking at monitoring the 2021 budget. So we're in the process of going back through those documents, and we're proactively setting up some meetings with different departments just to get an understanding of sort of where they're at. We had access to the system, gained that, and Ed's going to give a little overview on sort of where we're at from a budgetary standpoint as of, I believe the data was from last week, where we were for the first quarter. And then the next step will be just sort of having a dialogue as to what we want those reports to look like going forward. This report's just sort of summarized. We wanted to get some data in the hands of the committee, just so you could sort of see where you're at year to date from a budgetary standpoint. And then we'll also be working on, I know we've been working with the Controller's office on the CARES Act, just to get an understanding of what's carrying forward into 2021, so we can do some budget modifications there as well, so that we have a general idea, where things stand for what was approved and what was paid out of 2020 as well. So that's sort of where we're at. I mean, where we're going, we're still building the understanding of the budget from the documents that Tom had, as well as the budget documents, and then supplementing that with the meetings with the departments. And as we do those meetings, we're understanding how they're structured and those kind of things, which is really going to set us up for the 2021 budget preparation as well. But also we're paying attention to any variances that look like, hey, revenues might be falling short, or expenditures might be trending in a certain direction that we need to get a handle on at this point. But I'm going to turn it over to Ed just to sort of cover the summary data. And I'm not sure if everybody had received that in advance, or if this is the first time you're going to see it, but I'm going to turn it over to Ed to just sort of walk through where it looks like we're at on a quarter to date, first quarter standpoint.
Thank you, Corey. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Can everybody see that?
Not yet.
Let's see here. Host disabled participant sharing. All right, never mind. I can't do it.
Yeah, I think somebody's going to have to
can.
enable him to share his screen. It looks like I'm also locked out of sharing screen.
Yeah,
the
so
host.
I'll have Natalie give you permission.
Okay, can you see it now?
Not yet. She's got to walk over physically to Natalie and
Oh,
have
okay,
her change that. I'm sure she's multitasking right now,
I'm sure.
probably working on the agenda for another meeting. There we go.
Okay, can you see that now?
Yes.
The general fund expenditure report by department? Okay, so basically I downloaded a report from the system and had to manipulate it somewhat to get a more condensed report, a more high-level report to view the budget. Basically, I'm having the page, the general fund currently after the first quarter is at 22.5%, which obviously isn't too bad. If you're taking the math, should be at 25%. So the general fund expenditures are slightly under the 25% for the first quarter. I don't know if I want to get into any details as far as departments. Everybody seems to be in line. There is one line, the miscellaneous line obviously looks well over budget, but I believe that is the CHIRP grant, which wasn't budgeted for this year, but it's an in and out grant, so it really doesn't affect the overall general fund budget. So I don't know if there's any questions as far as the expenditures. Like I said, I've been meeting with some of the departments, the prison, 911, the assessment office, the transportation department, getting a better feel as far as the operations in the county, like Corey said, so I have better understanding when it comes to budget time. I don't know if there's any questions at this point of the expenditures, the revenue side totals. Okay. Anybody have a question? The revenues are at 23.45%. Again, slightly under budget, but then again, you'd have to consider that the real estate taxes are just starting to come in March. With some of the departments I did meet with, their revenues are slightly behind, namely the prison, but obviously they weren't housing outside prisoners because of COVID. So COVID still has somewhat of an effect on the revenue side of the budget. Does anybody have any questions?
And I think the other thing, and we'll circulate these documents, but just for a frame of reference, this isn't what we would envision the report looking like going forward. This is sort of a point in time where we wanted to get some information in your hands. We'll be looking for some comments, maybe an informational session. Margaret, we talked about different options on reporting this on a regular basis. But we really want to try and, use the system to its fullest extent, in prepping these reports, because that way we can get it to you guys in a quicker time frame. And then we can work on how you want it presented, what you want it to look like. I have some example reports that I use in one of the other counties that we can walk through and just really highlight the specific areas that you might want to take a look at. But generally speaking, what I try to go through is give you an idea on a department by department basis, so you can see sort of net, both the revenues and expenditures. The system, maybe Jason will have to talk a little bit how to get those side by side, because most of the reports generate just revenues or just expenditures. So, we'll have to get to a presentation that makes some sense going forward for everybody so you can see everything. But we think it's important to see the revenues and expenditures by department side by side. And the other one that we typically will look at is, just giving you a view of objects or account summaries, just to give you an idea of like, hey, salaries and benefits across the general fund are, trending in this direction, that kind of thing. So if there are other things you want to see on a regular basis, we'd encourage you just reach out. We'll try and schedule some time, maybe individually, to talk about what you might want to look at going forward, and we can sort of customize this to that in the future. If everybody's okay with this, Margaret, we can send this out to circulate if they haven't already seen it, after this meeting.
From a management
And I think
perspective,
that's, yeah, I
just
don't know if there's
wanna
any comments. Go ahead.
I would just say from a management perspective, as a manager trying to oversee departments for which I have some responsibility, it's really important for me to be able to see these numbers and know where we've got aberrations or variations in real time so that we can step in and make adjustments as necessary. It doesn't help to have it, the information so far down the road that we can't make adjustments. So I'm for more reports more frequently, just from my vantage point.
Yep. Yeah. And I think what I would envision is maybe a more formalized report, and we can talk about frequency maybe on a quarterly basis, but have something that's system generated that, is a much less, maybe less of a show report that doesn't have as many visuals or something, but has the data there to analyze. But on a regular basis, Ed's pretty much looking at these, making sure trends, if there's anything that's trending in a different direction, we'll pull them. One thing to keep in mind is these type of reports, you can generate them more frequently, but depending on how expenditures are coming and those kind of things, they will get updated, up until the close for that month is completed. So the real-time reports, there can be some lag in getting some of the accrual expenditures in there. But that's the kind of stuff that we're looking for from a trend basis, from the finance side. So anything that's on here that has, spending patterns that would be exceeded, typically what we'll go back and look at is the timing of how those expenditures are paid, because some of them could be subsidies, et cetera, maybe that a different time period came into, or as Ed mentioned, there was one in here, I think it was the ERAP funds, if I'm not mistaken. You'll see increases on the revenue and expenditure side. So those will offset each other, but those are the kind of variances that we'll dive down into and talk with the departments on a regular basis. And again, this is high level. I mean, we can drill down in the detail by line item in each department and get those variances as well from the system. So depending on what level of detail this group wants to see it on a regular basis, we can do a formalized report, or we can do it, informal reporting just to get you information on a more timely basis. That's up to you.
I think maybe in the interest of time, we should have this discussion, but it's not time sensitive. If we could perhaps have this be on the agenda for the next finance committee meeting.
Yep.
I think we need to
Sure.
move along then. So item B is the ADC and 2021 budget. Is that something for Jason or Margaret?
I'll jump in. I'm going to guess it's for me. I know today at the, I think we budgeted for 2021, the ADC to be $2.25 million. Today at Retirement Board, we're discussing the change in assumptions and methods for the retirement and from the actuary standpoint. So that could be less, in all likelihood, I think it will be less than that, by potentially up to about $500,000 or so, depending on what decisions the Retirement Board makes today. So there will be some savings there as far as the county contribution goes. As you're all aware, only one of the scenarios in those options increased the ADC over what we were anticipating to pay in 21. So, and I believe even the actual on our current assumptions is less than what the estimate was in October of 2020 for this year. So we will see savings there. That will go back to the general fund as well. Like I said, at a minimum, it'll be about $250,000, and I think at the maximum around $400,000.
All right, so we'll go into much more. Go ahead, Margaret.
I was just interested in, when we get to what that number is, a discussion among all of you about where that would be allocated back to the general fund, and if there would be a thought on the part of the Board of Commissioners about how they would like to either reallocate that now, or put it in reserve or whatever. But I don't want it to just, we don't want it to just languish there. We want to be deliberate in our thinking about what happens with that money, because that will be it's great news, and I just wanted to get it on our radar screen because it does impact our budget. And
All right, so we'll go into more detail on that in another hour and a half. But it does, as Margaret mentioned, have impact on the budget and the county finances if we suddenly have $250,000 of found money. Now, what do we want to do with that? Okay, next item is the 2020 year-end update and discussion. So does that go back to Margaret, Jason, or Susquehanna?
Jason, right?
Sure. So we are, still working through some of the year-end process, especially as I'm going to combine this with D, actually, since we're talking about it now, because I'll combine those in. But so we are still working through some of the 2020 year-end as it relates to the audit, some of the grant roll forwards. So, but that there's, I guess, an end in sight for that as well. We did have a conversation with Baker Tilly yesterday about where we're at in the audit process for 2020 as well. And that process is a little bit behind, as most counties are at the moment. GFOA this year is still offering basically a no excuse extension of the filing of the comprehensive annual financial report. So we will be looking towards filing that extension, although we're not really prepared to make that decision today. I think we'll look at it closer into June to see about extending it to the end of July. But again, GFOA is not, there's no fault or anything if you do extend this year. They understand a lot of counties and a lot of different governments received funds that they weren't anticipating and are now trying to kind of pick up some of the pieces from that. So, but yeah, we're still working through it, but it's should be wrapping up here in the next couple of weeks.
Well, Jason, not counting CARES Act funds, do we have a ballpark? Did we have a slight deficit? Do we have a surplus?
I believe, without in front of me here, not counting CARES funds, which is one of the challenges, it would be a slight deficit because we did lose some of the fees that we typically hadn't had or would have had, thinking about liquid fuel, those kind of fees, and hotel tax. Some of the fees we would have collected off of that as well were obviously significantly lower than previous years.
And probably also the tenant inmates at the correctional
Correct, yep.
facility. That number probably fell off substantially in the second half of the year.
Correct as well. Yep.
But we're talking a deficit in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, I don't think it's not millions. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's something I think we also need to have then on our next agenda is, how we want to put that into the 2020 budget once it closes, because we do always have the option of pulling something from a reserve fund or rearranging the revenue a little bit during period 13. Potentially a small deficit would not necessarily be a bad thing. Any other discussion from the rest of the committee on the possibility of the county having a small deficit for 2020?
Well, one of the things that was important to me from this standpoint was we as a Board of Commissioners tasked Susquehanna with getting to us where the deficit or surplus, basically where the year-end monies were going to be at, because we may want to take some of the surplus and put it into capital if that was the case. And so I just want to make sure that my understanding is we're still waiting on some things for you, Jason, from the controller's office, so that we can get that number a little bit more finer point. I just want to use this meeting as an opportunity to hear from Susquehanna if they need anything from you, so we can all be on the same page about when we'd be getting that.
Sure.
Yeah, so
sorry.
yeah, I
Corinne.
can jump in on that one, Jason. We have a meeting scheduled this afternoon, because on the CARES Act, so you're talking about non-CARES Act, Jason, right? You're saying there's a slight deficit. That would not include the CARES Act?
Yeah, I was just responding to the question on that one. So if we factor
Right.
in CARES Act and stuff, then the picture's different. So
Yeah, so just to clarify, just so we're all on the same page, I don't know that that's where you're going to end up in the general fund at the end of the day. He was talking if you didn't take CARES Act into consideration, and I think that's the piece. We have a meeting scheduled later this afternoon. Travis, I believe, had provided us some information that we were going through, in order to reconcile. So that right now there's really three different pieces that we were trying to reconcile. There's a list of approved CARES Act project. And again, we sort of came in after the fact. So we were trying to get our hands around, okay, how does that reconcile to what's paid in the system? So I think we have a pretty good handle. Travis feels like he's reconciled in the system to identify which transactions, Jason, you can speak up to, were actually charged to the CARES Act. So now it's a matter of reconciling the list that was approved items to how they got paid in the system to know what is outstanding left on those items. And knowing that there's a third component there, that what was reported on the FSR, you have excess expenditures well above what your allocation was that could have been charged to the grant, but they were reported a certain way on the FSR to close out the grant. So there's really three pieces that need to be reconciled. And I'm hoping today, Travis, you have a pretty good handle, I think, around where the expenditures are. What I'd need to get down into is just the detail of that to be able to reconcile it to the list of what was approved by the commissioners, to get back to a number of, okay, here's the number of funds that were basically encumbered that we didn't liquidate yet. Are they still good projects? Are they still moving forward, that we can get to a number that, yeah, there's going to be a surplus from this most likely. How much of that is already set aside for projects that have been approved but weren't, liquidated up to this point. So I hope to have a better handle on that after our meeting today. There's just a couple of questions that I have on the spreadsheet and need to get back into the detail in order to be able to reconcile those three pieces, if you will.
Okay, that's helpful from my standpoint. The one thing that I just, just so we're all on the same page is, I think if we're coming in at a surplus, I at least would want to talk with Commissioner Higgins and Dersham about moving some of that surplus before the year closes out into capital. That's one
Yep.
thing that I'm interested in doing. And so we just need to have the data behind that. But I will say, I mean, when you first, without the CARES Act, sure, absolutely, with deficit big time. But when we start, pay, I mean, I'd hope that with the CARES Act, Jason, where do you see us at? Or do you have any ballpark at this point, or do we have to wait a few more days, weeks? What do you think the time? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're meeting with our office meeting with Corey this afternoon. I think when you start factoring in CARES Act funds, there will be a surplus. What that number is right now, I don't know that I have that off the top of my head, but again, I was just responding to the specifics of the first question, so I didn't want to alarm anybody of that. But and maybe Travis can speak a little bit more to it right now as well. He has been knee deep in that process as well with the CARES funds and that stuff as well. So he may have a better idea, although I don't want to put him on the spot. So Travis, if you don't, you can just mute your screen and walk away from your computer very quickly.
No. We're right now, the general fund is at a $1.8 million surplus prior to net use. And I'm guessing net use is going to come in when you combine all the different funding, it's about a $200,000 drop. So I'd expect me in there closer to like 1.5, 1.6 surplus overall.
Okay, that's helpful. That's very helpful.
A big
Okay.
one. A lot of money moved over.
Okay, that's helpful. That's very, very helpful.
But
Thank you.
if we do have a surplus of something maybe north of $1.5 million, but it's primarily or exclusively due to CARES Act funding, is there any guidance from any of our regulatory bodies as to how we account for that surplus?
So I'll just offer two things. I think what's important is to know how many projects still are yet to be spent on. So on that approved list, I think there's a listing of items, and I've seen some stuff come through for 2021 that said, hey, it was approved under CARES Act funding. So some of those things I think will still be obligations that really, until that reconciliation between, what we're reflecting in the system and on the approved list that I believe Margaret had given us, we need to know what's still there to be spent, if you will, to come down to what is really available. But at that point, I mean, you've already fulfilled all the eligibility requirements on those funds. So they're really general fund monies to be allocated however the government decides, whatever purpose you want to. There wouldn't be no further restrictions on those funds.
We were projecting at the close of December 30th, about $1 million that was received through CARES Act, but not expended. And that would be the roll forward amount. And so at this point, we're just trying to as they've all described, make sure that that's what it looks like. But we moved forward in 2021 and the commissioners approved contracts, for example, for the testing site, the AMI testing site through March, with the understanding that that roll forward CARES Act money would be used to pay for the site. And there are a couple of other items like that. But, our best guess was $1 million at the time to roll forward. And we just, need to figure out the behind the scenes accounting of that.
Yeah, and I
Would you say
think
that's
the other
right?
important thing, and I know, Jason, we had a meeting last time, a couple of weeks ago, just talking about, going forward, because realistically, we have some recommendations that we've been talking through with Jason and Margaret on how to get these funds and record them, going forward for these new grant programs, so that we're not so far behind. I know there were things that were changing and there were things that were, maybe eligible at the end of the grant that weren't eligible initially, but hopefully we can get a system set up so that we can track this a little bit more exactly going forward. So we're working on a process with the controllers and Margaret, just to get through that so we can give you better answers quicker on the new grant funds.
Yeah, and I mean, this is all kind of related to E as well, but let's talk about ERAP CHIRP and the American Rescue Plan, and with that being a 4-year grant, especially, we're going to end up, we and Susquehanna are meeting. We're going to meet today, but Treasury still hasn't issued their guidance on this topic specifically. So we'll be meeting as soon as Treasury issues guidance on ARP to figure out how to, so that when we have those grants, we can give to what Corey said, we give that information back a little quicker, track it a little bit better too.
So go ahead, Mark, sorry.
I would just say, it sounds like we have fairly clear guidance then that after we have accounted for all of the known liabilities, if we have a surplus left and it's primarily or even exclusively CARES Act dollars, where we put that is up to feedback from finance and the treasurer and the controller's office, possibly the auditors as well. But it's somewhat up to the commissioners as a final decision as to where we put that money. And nice to have pretty straightforward guidance on that. Thanks.
Well, my final point was just, do we have do you think it's a week? Is it 2 weeks until we know that final number of where our 2020 end is, budget year end is going to be, the year end update?
Well, I think from the CARES Act side of things, it's a matter of the follow-up on the meeting today, so we can get down into the detail and reconcile the two. And I think that'll give us the information to reconcile to the list of approved projects. So depending on, how many discrepancies or changes there are in the transaction, I mean, the volume of transactions is pretty high. I don't know that I can give a definitive, but the answer to your question is, I guess, Jason, you'd probably have to have an idea if there's other accruals that need to get booked, or how comfortable are you on the other numbers side? I think from our standpoint, it's quantifying what's left that was approved that wasn't in those numbers. From your side, it's more so, are there going to be audit adjustments till we get the final numbers?
Yeah, I mean, we're still, there's still some things we're working on, like I said, on the audit side. So, but I ballpark, I would say probably maybe within the week or two, Mike, we would have a better idea of that for you, in a little clearer picture. So,
okay, and then a better idea is good. I appreciate that, but in terms of final numbers, would it be fair to say that final numbers are not going to be done until the audit's done? Is that fair to say?
final county numbers. Yeah, I mean, if they have adjustments, it'll change what those numbers are. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I mean,
just
I think
for-
we should be
Well-
pretty close outside of a significant audit adjustment. Once you feel like you have all the, the accruals booked, et cetera. We should have a general idea, but you won't have final numbers until the audit's done.
And I'm going to, Travis, I was going to jump on here in a second, but I also wanted to just note that in our conversation with Baker Tilly yesterday, we're going to be sending them information by the end, some more additional information by the end of next week, but they don't have a team that will be working on some of it until closer to the end of May. So until they start working through it, if there's any adjustments, it could be, during that period. Does that sound about right, Travis? Or
Nope, that sounds about right. And I will say, I think since I've been here, the auditors have actually done an adjustment to our books after I was done, once we get the numbers wrapped up. But I will say one of the big things we're still waiting on is depreciation expense. And capital assets hasn't come through Julie yet, but she's working on that this week, I believe. So if she gets that to me this week, it takes me a couple days at least to do that. So that'll wash some numbers out as well. Because there'll be some big entries going through for, I think transportation got a couple new buses in 2020. I don't even know what PSU and Kind did.
So when do we have until because I know there in previous years there was always a push to if we needed to move any money, we need to move any money by the end of the year. I'm sorry, if we needed to move any money that would affect the prior budget year, we always had a date that we needed to get that done by. What is our date if we the commissioners would want to move money in 2020 to capital so that it's reflected in the audit? What's the date that we would need to do that by?
I mean,
think that would
The
be-
year until,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Travis.
so I mean, that's pretty much going to be a couple days before the auditors go to print, because we can always, I mean, that's a one entry line entry or one entry to do. So you're probably fine up until June 10th, 15th, maybe later. Until,
Okay,
I mean, if we file early.
No, that's helpful as well. Okay, great.
Yeah, we report in the comprehensive annual financial report, Mike, the unreserved fund balance. And so at that point, if we're reviewing that and it's larger than expected or whatever, then at that point we would come back to you and say, well, we'd probably have a presentation from Baker Tilly sometime in that time frame as well. And then from there, you'd have the opportunity to make that decision as the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you.
Good, thanks for getting to the heart of that question there, Mike. It seems like a chicken and egg situation. Very good. So we have until early June to for the auditors and controllers to give the commissioners a fairly solid idea as to what the surplus is, including the CARES Act dollars. And the commissioners can make the choice as to what we do with any excess unreserved funds. We have a good suggestion about allocating a large fraction of those to capital. Then we give the feedback, and then we can finally close the books. That sounds good. So anything else on the audit update, Jason? Oh, you're on mute, Jason.
Not for 2020, but I did just want to let the Finance Committee know that Center County for 2019's budget or audit was awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for our comprehensive annual financial report. We received that in early April, notification from GFOA on that. So we did again receive the Excellence Award for the 2019 audit as well.
Very good. Glad to hear it. All right, so now I think we can move on to item E, American Rescue Plan, with having, thank goodness, at least some time to discuss the issue. I think it was alluded to earlier that since this particular grant program is very, very large and will span at least 3 county budget years, that perhaps we need to do some special planning from an accounting and finance standpoint. So I'll hand it over to Margaret to kick that off, and then you pull in experts as needed.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. We started to talk about this a little bit earlier, and there is some thinking that, well, first, let's start with all of the items that we know from the Department of Treasury that need to be in place in order to receive the first portion are in place. Jason has confirmed that for us, and so we know that we're good to go when we need to apply for the money with the different numbers and so forth. So just establish that fact, correct, Jason?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So secondly, I think a conversation needs to be held around, do we establish a separate account or some really truly a side account that we would deposit the money into and then keep track of expenditures from that, given that we are going to cross several fiscal years. I know that Corey, I believe, and Ed have been having conversations maybe, or talking about conversations with the controller's office, but you know, just given our, I would say, given our experience with the CARES Act, no one's fault. It was an evolving, fast-paced process, but we don't want to find ourselves in this situation again. It would be better to track the APR dollars in one location if possible. So I just thought, put it on the agenda for today to see what everybody's early thinking is on this. I mean, we're only maybe 2 weeks away from receiving the direction here about how to get the first check in, and what does that look like. We are going to have an APR meeting next week, a work session to start talking about how the money might be appropriated by the commissioners in terms of subject area and timeframes and all those, you know, kind of high level conceptual, these are the buckets where the commissioners would like the money to go, but the backroom mechanics are of interest as well.
Do you want me to take this, Jason?
Sure.
I'm already in touch with M&T Bank about setting up a new account for the APR money, AR, American Perfect 8. I can't
ARP,
even-
American Rescue Plan.
Thank you. That's the one. Let the minutes reflect that I didn't say it incorrectly. But I'm in process with them, and Jason, I checked with Jason to see if there's any limitation on whether that could be an interest-bearing account, and it doesn't look like there is, so we'll go ahead and set that up as an interest-bearing account, and that's in the works right now.
And just to add on to that, the intent is not to issue the checks, the individual checks for whatever projects out of that account. They'll still be paid out of the general fund and then transferred into, and then dollars will be transferred out of that ARP account into the general fund just to recover those dollars. So we won't be, we won't have new checks or anything for that account, but that will be where those dollars will be housed so that we know the interest that is accruing by just going in and looking at statements rather than having to do, calculations and stuff. We are still working with Corey and Ed and my office on how we're going to account for that in the system, whether it's going to be a special revenue fund, whether there are some other options out there as well. So we're still working through that, but we are waiting on Treasury's guidance that might help guide that a little bit more as well.
All right, so it looks like we're going to put the American Rescue Plan money in a completely separate account. It's actually going to be a physically different account. Colleen's already doing the legwork on that. Seems to be no prohibition against our collecting at least a little bit of interest on the money. Obviously, we'll need to wait to get guidance as to whether that is considered American Rescue Plan money or whether we can transfer that to the general fund, because even 0.5% on 15 million bucks is going to turn into some kind of money. And then Jason, you covered the mechanics, that it's not actually going to be its own separate checking account, but we'll be able to very closely follow the money flows. And again, thank goodness we have almost a year to receive GFOA guidance as to how we reconcile the American Rescue Plan balances along with standard county finances at the end of this upcoming fiscal year. Does that pretty much cover the topic?
Yeah.
All right, very good. So now with the few minutes left, we can move into process for budget modifications. Again, I'm assuming Margaret probably kicks this one off.
I actually did not add this to the agenda. Mike did, I believe.
Oh, all right,
Yeah.
well, go ahead,
Sorry.
Mike.
Oh, no, sure. No worries. So this was something that I think now that Susquehanna's up and running with us, Jason's fully staffed in his office. And we know that in 2021, we're going to obviously have more amendments we're going to have to do to our budget due to the American Rescue Plan, was to take a step back and we could even use there's a few examples we can use. It could be the ADC this year, or it could be how we're going to handle in our budget the Centercrest building. And my thought always has been that we all know that the budget we pass and becomes the authority for spending in the county or county government on January 1st is not going to look the same 365 days later at the end of the year. But there has to be, in my view, at least, from just in terms of the changing authority of where we're spending money. So, for example, with Centercrest, if we're going to be taking money, if we're going to be putting additional funds in to maintain the building, we're going to be needing to somewhere in our budget reflect that. And so this is just well, how do we do that? And I really do feel that at a commissioners meeting, there should be some action taken to reflect or change the budget in those instances. Same thing with ADC, where if we lower our ADC budget amount from 2.2 to let's say 1.8, that there should be some sort of action that's taken to say we're moving $400,000 into a new line item. But I think we also have to respect what our policies are, or what our what it has been previously passed in terms of what that looks like, because I do believe in past years there was more latitude was given to our finance department to do those kind of things, and I think it might be good to just reflect on those and say, well, do we want to maybe change those, what those authorities look like, and then ultimately what kind of actions does the Board of Commissioners at a public meeting need to take in order to amend the budget. Or what thresholds are we setting? So by no means is there any solutions on the table at this point. I'm just mentioning it as I think it'd be a really good time to take as much time as we need, have as many discussions we need, but come up with some sort of understanding about what that looks like. I've seen other counties do it with it's a resolution where they pass a resolution that amends their budget in certain line items. So I just put that out there. And if there's any, again, go back to you, Mr. Chair, if there's any discussion you'd like to have about it, but that's kind of where I'm coming from. I think almost basically, what do we need to do in public session to amend the budget, and what do we not need to do in public session? I think those are my two. That's my big question.
I think it's a great idea, Commissioner. My train of thought would be if there's a line item within a department that needs a budget amendment within that department, I would say probably would just be approved through Margaret and the finance office. But again, I agree with you. If it's a larger item or it's a budget amendment between departments or funds, then I definitely believe it should be put on the agenda at the public meeting.
And
Go ahead,
actually,
Margaret.
that is our current practice. So we in finance and accounting have the ability to move between small line items, very small amounts of money. So if supplies run over, we can take it from equipment and make the budget revision, and I sign off on those before the action is taken. Tom instituted, because prior to that, I think it was different, but when Tom was in the role of Director of Financial Management, his understanding, my understanding was that no changes would get made, money moved between any departments without the consent of the Board of Commissioners, because you set the guidelines for the budget and what dollar amounts are to be spent by each department. So we do not now, to the best of my knowledge, nothing comes from my end where we would recommend moving money from one budget to another. I think one of the things that we've not addressed is when we get new revenue or when revenue changes, how does that get allocated? And that really should, so for example, with the ADC, if we end up with new revenue or revenue that's not needed, it's budgeted, so it's not really new, it's just available revenue at this point, you should determine, and we should have a process for you deciding how that gets allocated across the departments. That would be my suggestion on that. I think in the case of Centercrest, we do, I'd like to have a conversation about how we start to record the expenditures for Centercrest, almost like a separate fund budget. And we need to have some revenues to go along with that. So instead of financial management paying for the electric for Centercrest out of their existing budget, I think the board needs to identify some revenues from some place, like maybe from capital, because that's where we had originally earmarked some funding, and take action to move that into a Centercrest fund, because we know that we want to start keeping track of what the facility's costing us.
Yeah, there should be a separate cost center and a line item for expenditures from Centercrest.
And I think to go to something that Margaret said, it's a perfect example, just to kind of put a finer point on it, is these would be things that we know for not almost certain, but it's not fluctuating revenue. So it's not every week we've got to say, we might get more from this line item or this, we're not sure. This is where we know for sure the ADC is not, we're going to, Corn Ferry is going to give us a letter. It's got a definitive number in it that we can use for our 2021 budget and make that adjustment. And that 400,000, where does that go? I think that's important for us to weigh in on. And then, and that's obviously more money we can allocate out. But then the flip side for the Centercrest project, that's an example where we know that there's going to be new expenditures needed that we didn't have in the budget on January 1st that we need to identify. So it's for those larger things that we're more short over. So yeah.
Right, that's good, because from an individual department basis, I thought we already had a pretty good procedure in place. Obviously, our department heads are doing their best in August and September to guess as to what things might be looking like almost a year and a half later. And there's going to be some small fluctuations. But yes, if we have a multi-$100,000 change in the ADC, if we have something quite significant like Centercrest that you just can't forecast about till it happens, and of course, how we're going to account for the American Rescue Plan dollars, which are very significant. Okay. Thankfully, there's not a huge rush on any of those. That also, I think, probably needs to be a discussion for our next meeting as well. On, should I call it maybe large budget modifications? All right, so good discussion on that.
And if I could just interject, just so we could have it maybe as part of the conversation next time, and it just dawned on me as Mike and Margaret were talking about this, but we now know we're going to have more expenditures related to Centercrest, and we know we're going to have a smaller ADC. So that might be an opportunity to use that additional dollars that we were anticipating to be the ADC to cover expenditures for Centercrest as well. Just something to consider maybe for next time when we discuss this.
All right, good. Are there any announcements at this point? All right, so for agenda items for our next meeting, which will probably be soon, I have reporting issues, deficit or surplus for the 2020 year end, and then discussion on large budget modification procedures. All right, if we've covered everything, we've got another meeting coming up in 4 minutes. I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second that.
Sounds like Colleen had the second. All those in favor of adjourning, do so by saying aye. Oh, wait,
Aye.
wait, sorry.
Oh,
Aye.
What?
Natalie Smith just sent me a a message saying our next meeting is going to be May 27th. Do you think we should have one earlier than that?
probably worthwhile if people think so. If others think so, I should say.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, whenever,
Saying
whatever
some
you think.
nodding.
Yeah.
All right, so we can send an email out about it, but it looks like that May 6th or May 20th might be a possibility.
Okay.
But we'll send an email out on that. Okay, all those in favor of adjourning, do so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, we are adjourned. Thanks.